We just got the much anticipated fourth chapter in the John Wick franchise after years of waiting. So now it's time to rank these bad boys from worst to best. This is gonna be like picking my favorite child, so here goes nothing. What's up, guys? I'm Sully, and I'm super excited because today we get to talk about all four John Wick movies, which is a franchise I just absolutely love. Let me know in the comments below what your ranking is of these four films. But before I dive in, I just want to say, I love all of these films separately and for different reasons. I think the lowest I have one of these films rated is like a 4 out of 5. So all of them are super badass, but I definitely have my personal feelings about which one is the best and which one is the worst. So we're going to start from the bottom of my list with John Wick Chapter 2. So this movie did a lot of stuff right, and one of the smartest things it did was really lean into something that got a lot of people hooked after seeing that first movie, and that is the world building. One of the best examples of that is the inclusion of the marker this time around. If you don't remember, the marker is basically like this little pocket watch size thing. You put a bloody thumbprint into it and give it to somebody who you need a favor from, and in return, that guy gets to cash in a favor, whatever he wants it to be, whenever he wants it to be, and then that marker is complete, and only then. It's basically the IOU of the Hitman world, and adding little traditions and rules into this Hitman landscape really does a lot to make this franchise stand apart and give us a little bit more substance than the usual run-of-the-mill shoot-'em-up. And taking that further, we also get to see what really happens when you break one of those few rules. We all know John Wick at the end of this movie kills on Continental grounds, which is a massive no-no. That gets him excommunicado from the Continental Hotel, ultimately setting up that third installment. But staying with the hotel here for a second, we get to see how big the web of Continental hotels really is across the globe here. John has to go overseas to deal with that task that will unbind him from his marker, and we get to see what the Continental Hotel will look like, but in Rome this time around, with all its own bells and whistles. But like, what, is this like the best Western of the Hitman world, basically, and these are just all over the damn planet? This movie really set the tone, I think, for what we can expect to see when we sit down to watch a John Wick movie. Like the shootout in the catacombs, the shootout in that Hall of Mirrors. Both of those set pieces were more extravagant and stunning than anything that was done in that first movie. So that's them telling us like, okay, every new entry is going to be bigger and more bombastic than the last. I think on the flip side though, out of all the four movies, Chapter 2 has the weakest villain. If you boil it down, it's just a rich and powerful dude that wants to become even more rich and powerful. Nothing we haven't seen done before changed the record. And since he had so much money at his disposal and had everyone doing his dirty work for him at the snap of a finger, it was hard to see him as a formidable enemy to go toe-to-toe with John Wick. Common, who plays a hitman at the same skill level as John Wick, is much more fun and interesting than the central villain here, and it's cool to see our main character go up against someone whose fighting skills are almost just as good as his. I also think this movie has the least interesting combat out of the four movies in the franchise. There's just a lot of grappling and a lot of throwing people over your shoulder to get them onto the ground to finish them off easier, and on one side, I feel like that's probably the most realistic way we see people fighting in real life, but the least interesting way to watch it. But like I said, one of these films had to take that bottom spot. This is still a great follow-up to that first film and has a lot to offer. Next up is John Wick Chapter 3 Parabellum, and the smartest thing this movie does is that it forces John Wick to go up against a ton of expertly trained assassins just like him. No longer are there just random ass henchmen that weren't a match for him in the first place, and we know now that our main character has a massive bounty on his head after getting kicked out of the hotel, so all these assassins are trying to win the damn lottery here. This one does a really good job of keeping all of the action fresh and pushing the franchise forward in that regard. Even though it's expertly shot, the first two movies, most of the action is done on foot or in a car. This time around it's bonkers. John Wick is on a motorcycle. John Wick is on horseback. This one really does a good job embracing the ridiculousness of this over-the-top violence, but still taking itself just as seriously as it needs to. Two of the best fight sequences in the entire franchise are in this movie. You have that one where John Wick is fighting alongside dogs with Halle Berry, and then you have the one in the antique shop where John Wick is throwing knives at the bad guys. They're both treating each other like human pincushions, basically. And that's something that these movies continue to do really well. Even though the scenes continue to get more over the top and insane as the franchise goes on, there's always a shred of realism to them. Like that knife fight is a good example. There are a ton of knife throws that land, but there are just as many that miss or bounce off the enemy in front of them. It's a nice nod from the director being like, look, we know this stuff is getting insane, but we still have some rules that we're gonna follow. And again, just like the last movie, we get to see the world expanded upon, but taken to the next level. John has to go to a few different exotic locations to complete this overarching quest that he's on, so he has to go to a new continental hotel in a new country. This time it's Morocco. So it's cool that they're letting us know there's probably one of these hotels in every major area of the world. But like, how many assassins are there that they need all of these things? Everyone and their mother must be trained in Kung Fu if this web of trained killers is that large. Coming in at the runner-up spot is John Wick. This first movie knows exactly what it wants to set out and do, and it accomplishes it so well. It's simple, it's raw, it's messy, but that's exactly what I love about this one. It was made for way less money than the usual action movie, or even other movies in this series for that matter, which is why it's so impressive that it spawned this massive franchise. The action sequences are just so addicting in this movie. I keep coming back and watching scenes over and over again from this one way more than I do from the other movies, whether it's John Wick protecting his home from waves of thugs or piling up bodies at that spa/nightclub. It never stops being entertaining even after I've watched it like 10 times. There is just so much attention to detail and nuance within these action sequences that I feel like I'm picking up on new stuff every time I revisit them, like how often a gun jams in real life, or how many bullets the gun John Wick is holding should have before it's empty. Paying attention to stuff like that shows that they're taking this over-the-top action and still finding a way to ground it in just a smidge of reality. A lot of that is because the man behind the camera, Chad Stahelski, is a long-time stuntman himself, so he's able to pick up on these little details that usually get glossed over in modern action movies. This movie is just such an accomplishment for the action genre in so many different ways. I actually just found out recently that this first movie didn't even have a film distributor until 2 weeks before it was supposed to come out. That means that if that didn't happen, it would have gone straight to DVD. And if that happened, I have no idea what the current action movie landscape would look like without this film being in the mix. One of the coolest parts of this film is that there's just enough subtle world building in there to keep us curious and to make it more memorable than the average 90-minute shoot-'em-up. We have this hotel that's run and operated by this underground society of hitmen. They have a strict code of ethics and their own currency, and they do it all in broad daylight right under the nose of the general public. They just left the perfect trail of breadcrumbs here to let you know there's a lot more going on than meets the eye, and a lot we still don't know about after seeing this first movie. Ian McShane and Lance Reddick do a great job as the hotel staff here. Also going to take a quick second to say rest in peace to that man. It was great seeing him on screen in this role. This movie does a good job of getting us to instantly be on John Wick's side and having us root for him as he just mows down this endless stream of people on his way to completing his goal. They knew exactly what they were doing, centering this thing around the murder of this main character's puppy. Like if it was a human, some people would probably be like, I don't know, that's a lot of bloodshed. But since it's a puppy, it's like, yep, okay, kill them all. It also doesn't hurt that this entry has the best villain performance in the entire franchise. This first movie is just wildly satisfying, and a big part of that is due to that simplicity. A guy gets wronged and he has all of the tools and the skills at his disposal to make everybody responsible for doing this to him pay the ultimate price. And it just serves as a great intro mission to what we know is to come later on. It also has Willem Dafoe in it, so you know it's good. Taking the top spot is John Wick Chapter 4. And look, I never thought I would ever say that one of the John Wick sequels plays better than the original for me. And with movies, a lot of the times bigger doesn't always mean better. But it's clearly looking like that's the case with John Wick Chapter 4. You can call it recency bias, you can call it whatever you want, but this movie is the culmination of all the groundwork laid by the first 3 films. This one takes all of the world building, the character development, and the consequences of the previous entries and interweaves it all and cranks it up to 11. And the best part is that they package it into a 3-hour epic that somehow does not overstay its welcome. The big difference maker here is that there are so many unique and fleshed out side characters to surround John Wick while he's out there doing his thing. And that's not to say that there weren't memorable side characters in the previous entries, but they have some in here that I wouldn't mind seeing a spin-off for. And I hate spin-offs. Donnie Yen and Scott Adkins kind of stole the show for me here, and they played off of Keanu Reeves' tight-lipped performance perfectly. They just did a really good job to make this underground hitmen-filled world actually feel lived in, which is the icing on the cake. But oh man, this film has some of the most impressive action sequences I've seen probably in my entire life. You can really tell that this was probably the movie this team wanted to make all along. They just didn't have the funding or the ability to make it happen because everything in here is so polished, and I don't think it could have been executed better than it was. But seriously, it's been a long time since an action movie had my jaw on the floor and had me turning to my buddy in the middle of sequences to say that was incredible. It really plays out like a video game, and I mean that in the best way possible. There are different levels and mini bosses, there's different music and fighting styles to go along with those separate sections. And even though everything still feels like one cohesive epic package, all of those different segments feel so distinct from one another. You get your samurai fight, you get your bar fight, and obviously there's just a ton of gunplay in here too. I'm sure everyone's gonna walk out of the theater with a different favorite fight scene. For me, it's a tie between the one in France with the traffic-filled rotary, the Arc de Triomphe, and the scene in the house with the overhead tracking shot. Both of those sequences show just how much Chad Stahelski has learned behind the camera while making these movies, and that he's still finding new ways to innovate with every new film he makes. I am so glad I'm not some big-time action movie director, because I would be walking out of John Wick 4 saying, how the hell am I ever going to top something like that? So there you have it, my ranking of the 4 John Wick movies. It seems like everybody has a different order for this franchise, so make sure you drop your ranking in the comments below. And if you're not done talking all things John Wick, I'll leave my review of the 4th film in the end credits. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys at the next one.